Welcome back to the Scooby Doo series, where I make my way through all of the 14 Scooby Doo television series and select my favorite episodes from each show. Last video, I looked back to where it all began in 1969 with the Scooby Doo Where Are You series. But now we have reached the second chapter of this journey in the new Scooby Doo movies. The show aired starting in 1972 and ended in 1973. It focused on a longer, 43-minute runtime for the episodes, hence the title, The New Scooby Doo Movies. Each episode featured a famous, real or fictional guest star that was popular at the time to help the Scooby crew solve the mystery. This show had much more of a focus on the mystery rather than the actual monsters haunting the gang. But before I get into my top 10 favorite episodes, I have a few honorable mentions, of course. Honorable mention number 1 is The Haunted Carnival. This episode featured what I would say is the most well-known real celebrity guest, by today's standards, Dick Van Dyke. The episode isn't remarkable in comparison to the other episodes in the series, but what lands in an honorable mention is the fun carnival setting and pleasing colors. Dick Van Dyke is also a fairly good guest star, providing some goofy moments to the show without getting annoying like some of the other guests. My honorable mention number 2 is the ghost of Bigfoot. The most positive thing this episode has going for it is the ghost of Bigfoot himself. It's the most unique monster design in the whole show. The guest stars, Laurel and Hardy, are fun to have around, but feel like they don't necessarily bring anything new to the gang's dynamic. The mystery itself is pretty good, but what's done with the ski resort environment feels like a longer, lesser version of that snow ghost from the original series. My third honorable mention is the Loch Ness mess. The final honorable mention slot belongs to the second Harlem Globetrotters episode. I'm glad there are so many episodes done with them, because they are my personal favorite celebrity guest stars featured in the series. Despite the Globetrotters being a group of 6 basketball players, nearly all of them feel like they have a distinct personality and add to the enjoyment of the series. This is one of the few episodes I watched for this series as a kid, but nostalgia aside, it's good, but not great. Now on to my top 10, and my number 10 is The Spooky Fog of Juneberry. The Spooky Fog of Juneberry featured Don Knotts in his second episode with the gang. He's a pretty quirky character, but is funnier in the first episode he's in. The premise of this mystery is also pretty interesting. There's a strange fog that rolls over the town of Juneberry, terrifying everyone away. It's entertaining to watch the gang search for the source of the fog by scouring the mines underneath the town, and adds to the tension when they come across a suspicious skeleton figure that they chase out of the mine. These 43-minute episodes can get dull sometimes, but this episode does do a pretty good job of keeping things interesting. Moving on to number 9, we have The Haunted Candy Factory. This episode features Cass Williams, who I think is an underrated Scooby-Doo guest star. It's difficult to explain what about her makes her one of the better guest stars. I just enjoy her screen presence. It's also interesting to see so many jokes revolving around her weight. I feel like that sort of thing wouldn't be used with guest stars today. But however, these weight jokes are way overused and get stale after the first few times. That's too bad that it's pretty much the only quote-unquote humorous moments that Cass Williams has. The Candy Factory setting is probably my favorite location in the new Scooby Doo movies, as it's a big breath of fresh air from the houses with a ridiculous amount of trapdoors in them. It thankfully doesn't overuse trapdoors, and instead utilizes the different types of candy machines in the factory for entertaining scenarios. The main thing dragging this episode down is the lack of good mystery. The identities of the green glob monsters are quite obvious, and the monsters themselves don't stand out at all. Number 8 is The Weird Winds of Winona. I prefer the way this episode handles the unexplained weather terrifies a small town idea that was in the Spooky Fog of Juneberry. The guests this time are the cast of the Speed Buggy show, and they're pretty fun. It was more believable why the gang had to investigate the mystery, and it felt like Speed Buggy and Tinker were utilized especially well throughout based off their different skill sets. Beside those obvious upgrades and the fact that it feels like it uses the long runtime better than Juneberry, The Weird Winds of Winona is just a newer, better version. Number 7 is The Phantom of the Country Music Hall. The singer Jerry Reed is the guest star of this episode, but by far, he gets the least screen time of any celebrity star in the new Scooby Doo movies. That's because he's kidnapped, and the gang must try to follow his singing through the country music hall to find him. It's a fresh concept that I've never seen explored in a Scooby Doo episode so far, which is why it's so neat. The song he sings on repeat, Pretty Mary Sunlight, is still stuck in my head as I'm writing this script, and it's been over a month since I've seen this episode. The other unique thing that this episode has are very clear human villains. The people wanting to scare the gang away from the country music hall are shown talking to each other, making their intentions clear. This different structure is what sets this episode apart from the rest. And even though the guest star doesn't add to the plot, and the monsters are some of the most forgettable in the show, its different take on the Scooby formula makes it one of the best of the new Scooby Doo Movies episodes. Number 6 is The Exterminator. Here's another episode with another interesting premise. It's a standard haunted house situation, but the gang is helping guest star Don Adams to exterminate it. It's a pretty strange idea, but it provides a more concrete reason for the gang to want to stay in a haunted house. I enjoyed Don Adams as the guest star. He was able to shift between the straight man and the comedic relief at different points in the episode, making him fairly unique as a guest star. It's also pretty interesting to see the gang explore the house, but the convenient, mysterious passageways are so done to death in the new Scooby Doo movies that this can drag when you're trying to watch all the episodes in a short amount of time, like I did. Number 5 is The Secret of Shark Island. Accompanied by Sonny and Cher, the gang travels to a beachfront resort to find out that it's haunted by sharkmen. I prefer this to the ski resort location in The Ghost of Bigfoot, because it feels like the episode does more with the beach environment. Sonny and Cher might be the most relaxed guests on the show. They feel like the only adult guest stars that actually acted like adults, and their playful bickering was a breath of fresh air from the slapstick when it comes to the comedic relief. The Sharkmen looked a bit ridiculous, as I imagine Sharkmen would really look, but I believe that their presence was hinted at well, and not overshown like too many monsters from this series. Overall, a solid episode that's just simply overshadowed by the episodes above. Number 4 is The Caped Crusader Caper. The second Batman episode is one that I enjoyed immensely in my childhood. Although I like the Harlem Globetrotters better as guest stars, I have to admit that Batman and Robin provide leadership and technology that totally changes the dynamic of the show. Instead of Fred and Velma leading the way, Batman and Robin tend to be the ones giving the orders in their episodes. The only thing missing from the characters, in my opinion, is humor. However, Penguin and Joker make their second appearance as villains, and are enjoyable as always, but this time they get to be the sole villains of the episode. I love how because the Joker and Penguin are such well-known villains, they can be shown more and use costumes to scare the gang away, while the audience knows exactly who's behind the masks. It creates a fun cat-and-mouse situation. The Batman and Robin episodes do a great job of moving from location to location to provide interesting settings without them getting stale over the long runtime. In this case, Joker and Penguin are after a flying machine created by the aptly named Professor Flaky, who sort of balances out the comedic portions in comparison to Batman and Robin. I can't say I have any complaints with this one, but it's probably technically the best episode of the new Scooby Doo movies, but I simply prefer 3 other ones. Number 3 is the Frickert Fracas. This is probably the zaniest episode of the new Scooby Doo movies. The gang teams up with comedian Jonathan Winters and travels to Frickert Farm to meet Jonathan's old friend Maude Frickett. What follows is an absolutely bonkers chase around the farm, first trying to catch what seems to be 2 intruders on the farm, but then a mysterious scarecrow is introduced into the mix. Why would anyone want to trespass on the farm, you ask? Well, Maude Frickert's late husband invented a chicken feed which can make chickens giant. That way, you can get ridiculous value from each chicken if you were to use them for food. The feed is buried somewhere on the farm, and the trespassers supposedly want it for themselves. A ridiculous premise, but it's very fun, lighthearted episode. The guest Jonathan Winters is one of the best. He's arguably the funniest guest in the new Scooby Doo movies, and shows himself to be a lovable coward like Shaggy and Scooby. The only detractor from this episode is one that many episodes in this series suffer from. The long length of the episodes make the mysteries feel overly long, and they can get boring. Running around the same farm does indeed get boring after a while. Number 2 is The Mystery of Haunted Island. This is the best Harlem Globetrotters episode in my opinion. The gang decides to take a cruise with the Globetrotters the day before the Globetrotters' big game, but they get on the wrong ship, a haunted ship, heading for, you guessed it, Haunted Island. Once on the island, they stumble into a house and attempt to get some sleep before they leave in the morning, but ghostly figures do their best to prevent them from doing so. I think that like the Caped Crusader Caper, this episode is very fundamentally strong. The plot is kept moving by using different locations, and the villains have strong motives. In this case, it's to keep the Globetrotters from getting a good sleep, and the guest stars add to the enjoyment of the episode. What I really like about this one is that the villains' plan actually succeeds. They may have been caught, but they achieve their goal of preventing the Globetrotters from sleeping. This leads to a whole other portion of the episode, where the Globetrotters try to play their game while falling asleep. The gang must help them stay awake long enough to win the game. The episode keeps on changing, as a strong episode should. I love so many things about the Mystery of Haunted Island, and it would be my number one, if not for my number one, the dynamic Scooby Doo affair. So this is my favorite Scooby Doo episode, and it's the first Batman and Robin episode. This episode makes wonderful use of its runtime, having two separate plots going on at once. First, the gang comes across a little house in a field that seems to disappear. They also encounter the Joker and Penguin, who use a fun house to mess with the gang. And who's the masked figure running around? The episode covers so much ground and has so many memorable moments that got stuck in my head when I watched as a kid. So many locations are covered in this episode, each one feeling distinctly different. The masked figure is a memorable monster when compared to the rest of the series, despite its bland design, but that really speaks to the memorable actions of the character. The mystery wraps up nicely, but once again, it never gets boring. When comparing it to a one-location episode like Frickert Fracas, it's ridiculous how many locations were fit seamlessly into this episode. You have Mrs. Baker's disappearing house, the junkyard, the Batman and Robin exhibit turned funhouse, the Batcave, and the room filled with toys where the final showdown takes place. This episode packs it all into one entertaining bundle, and that's why it's clearly the best episode of the new Scooby Doo movies. Thank you for watching the video. Feel free to post your lists in the comments below, and stay tuned for my next ranking video on the Scooby Doo show. Have a wonderful day.